briefly, there's a great crowd here. John Casey has been involved with this building for well over 20 years. He is now going to tell its story. Oh, John.
Thank you, Mervyn, for that. As Mervyn said, I have been involved in this building for over 20 years, and Mervyn's been involved with it for about 5 or 6 years at this stage. 5. And about 5 years ago, when I first met Mervyn, he said, and we had a long discussion about the building and my history with the building, and Mervyn actually said to me, "You've got to tell this story at some stage." So it's taken 5 years to put it all together, I suppose, in the last 5 years, to actually come up with this. So what this presentation really is about is it's a whole series of slides, right from my first involvement right through to the end, and tell stories on the way and that. So there's a lot of slides, no writing. I'm going to rattle through them quite quickly, so bear with me. Feel free to ask me questions along the way or anything like that. This is what you saw on the way in. This is what it is now, 2018. This building was commissioned in 1814 by effectively the Dublin Port and Docks Board to build 2 warehouses. John Rennie, Scottish engineer, architect, was commissioned to build 2 warehouses in Dublin to store tobacco and wine and whiskey. So what he came up with was this innovative idea to construct using a new material that had only been invented a few years beforehand, cast iron and wrought iron. What a researcher in UCD uncovered a number of years ago, Elizabeth Shooten, uncovered a sketch. This sketch is the first known sketch of this building, and it was done in 1818, and it was undertaken by the son of the designer. John Rennie was the designer, the engineer, and his son George Rennie did this sketch. This was found in George Rennie's notebook, and this is very similar to what you see upstairs, and this dates from 1818. So we didn't actually have this information back in year 2000 when I started here really on it, but this is something that has been uncovered, and I'll talk about this later on as well. So this is what you see in the building on the north end. You see this hipped roof. It wasn't always like that. This is what it was like in 1999, but you will notice that there's no hipped end on it. So the first thing that happened is this building was built with 2 hips. So it was built with a hip on the other end as well, looking out to the sea. But they decided they needed a road between the building and the sea in around 1880 or so. So they took the end off the building in 1880 and put up this brick gable. You see a couple of doors in it, and I'll talk about those later on. But that was the first change, and significant change they were aware of that happened to the building. We have a map from 1893, which is one of these maps stored in the British Library. This is a map that was produced for lots of cities around the UK and Ireland as well, and it indicates what was stored within buildings. So this is the map for this building, and it shows a couple of very interesting things. It shows the building divided in 3. It's very hard for you to see here, but there's actually cross walls indicated across the building, which would never originally have been there. So we know what condition the building was in 1893. And you can see that it's set back quite a bit from the river, so we can see at that stage that they have taken the northern end, the southern end off the building. When I was first became involved in this building, it was really year 2000, even though I had visited in 1996 as well. And this was the only drawing we had of the building. This was the only drawing that was available. And this, we understood, was prepared in 1927 as a record of what was here. But it did contain some very interesting information. And the top of the drawing refers to an underground drain, and it does give some dimensions, and it does indicate on the left-hand side the fact that the vaults, which is one of the vaults that you're sitting in at the moment, was cut back. So we can see that there's this whole gap that's left behind. And that vault structure, when they cut back the southern end of the building in the 1880s, they didn't cut back the vaults. So as you drive down the quays in front of the building now, or walk across it, you're walking across vaults just like this that are underneath the road out there. So tread carefully. When I first became involved in the building around 1999 and year 2000, this is the condition of the building. It had effectively been left as a warehouse, no specific use of it. It had started to deteriorate quite a lot. You could see rainwater coming in and mold growing walls. You can see windows at odd locations around the place from previous uses. You know, that there was a mezzanine put in a place in an office and someone said, I need a window, so they just put a window through the wall. You can see oaks were put in, door oaks like this. This is a particularly large one. And because it was so large, they used to actually drive trucks through into the building, 40-foot trucks. In my first visit here in 1996, I saw trucks in the building. So I'm surprised all the columns survived as well as they did because of that. This is another photograph of it. This is actually just where you came in, just above our heads today. This is the northern end of the building. That's the door that you go in and out of, just here. And this is where the staircase is in the far corner, which came down to get here. So this was in the year 2000. And as I was saying, there's trucks in the building. When I saw this in 1996 and 2000, there was cars parking in the building. People came and parked here, you know, because they could. It was a cheap car park, you know. So this was the condition that we saw it in. So it was a pretty poor condition. You had oaks in walls at very strange locations and original blind windows. This building would have been built with what they call blind windows, so it was effectively a recess for a window, but there was no window in it, otherwise people would rob the tobacco and the whiskey, obviously. So, but when they decided to put mezzanines in the building, then people decided they wanted real windows in it. So you had this situation in it in year 2000 as well. We also bricked up windows, and on one occasion, when we were doing the refurbishment work, we actually were trying to replace the bricks that were bricked up in the windows with a brick of a different match. So we took down the original bricks that we found, like say a panel like this, and they did exactly what they were asked to do. They bricked up the window, and what that means is when we took down the bricks, we found the window. So we actually found the window in behind the bricks. So it's been there for about 100 years, glass and all in it, you know. So I referred to there that there was 2 cross walls across the building to prevent fire breaking through from one side to the other side. But I remember vividly coming down in year 2001 when the contractor was, the first thing we did on the building was take down those walls. And I remember coming down to the building and going, wow, this is the first time in 140 years that people have actually been, you know, that I'm able to see this vista, been able to see from one end of the building to the other end of the building. So to describe the building consists of 72 vaults. So we're in one of the 72 here. And they act like bridges here, that the more load is put on them, the stronger they are. So that's why we know problems with trucks and cars and load up above. We don't really have a problem, as long as you put the load in the right places. And then above that, what was built was a cast iron and a wrought iron structure, which was very new at the time. That you'll notice that the columns, so there's 8 vaults across, and the columns, then there's 4 bays of the cast and wrought iron up above. And then there's various things that happen down below in order to keep the water out. We're actually sitting here below water level of high tide at the Liffey, but yet the place never gets damp, never gets wet. So, and that is down to the Victorian engineering here that really happened, that in 1818, when they built this building, they really knew what they were doing, and they used various natural materials to hold the water back. One of the things that they did as well here, when I refer to on the 1927 drawing as a drain, is below the ground here, below our feet, even lower, you'll see it on the left-hand side here, there is this very large sewer, effectively, to take the rainwater from both this building and all the docks here. And this building, according to the record drawings, this particular sewer it was 3,000 feet long, which is, you know, nearly 2 miles, and it could store 1 million gallons of rainwater. And how this works, this particular tunnel is below the level of the Liffey, so it had to store the water when the level of the Liffey was high. But so all the rainwater from this building goes into that particular tunnel down there that's underneath your feet out the front. So when we were doing some works, when you came in, you saw the Western Glass Conservatory, and when we were building that, we excavated down. So, but this is also the way that they built this in 1818. They didn't build this like a basement. They excavated the ground all around this, and they built it like what we're standing in here was a ground floor. And it was only when they finished, they actually brought the ground up to ground floor level all the way around it. And we could tell that by the way some of the stonework was done and everything like that. So what you see here now is you'll actually see the tunnel. We exposed the top of the tunnel because the record drawing showed it in a different place than what we found it. So, and this is the manhole, even though I've been down there, it's very hard to locate where it is. So this particular manhole is out in the, it's out just outside the glass canopy, and you could climb down into it. with a lot of safety apparatus and breathing gear and things like that. So there was quite a lot of rats down there at the same time. So I didn't stay very long. I walked about northwards just up to where the Lewis tracks are really. We couldn't get any further than that, but originally it did go further than that. This is the top of it, and when we broke into it by accident when we were building it. So this is the basement just outside the wall here that you see. And the sewer, just mapping it, what you actually see is that it goes from the Liffey here down the bottom left-hand corner, all the way parallel to the building along the top, and it holds 1 million gallons of water. So it was one of the we're back now designing to support storage of rainwater in terms of flood conditions, and this was done in 1818, so it was very, very forward thinking of what they were doing. This is a photograph of how it went out onto the Liffey. So this was a gate that they built, and look at the quality of the stonework here. And what's missing from this is the original cast iron flap, which we took out around 2004. So when the Liffey was high outside, what happened is the cast iron door closed. The water pressure of the Liffey caused it to close. And when the Liffey level went down, the door opened by the water that was stored in the sewer, pushing it back out again. So that's what worked for 180 years without any problem. So we replaced that with a more modern device that's out in front on the Liffey. So going back to the original layout of it, we have 72 vaults here, and that's what we're standing in. And on the top, this is, you can see where they referred to the sewer that I was just talking about there. This is what these vaults looked like back in year 2000. When I first came here, they're all kind of whitewashed, and there was a bit of a concrete screed over the top of them all. You see nice numbers on them there, number 4 vault. With 72 vaults here and very few fire exits open at the time. My first visit here, it scared the life out of me. I felt I needed a piece of string to find my way back out, in the cave. But fortunately, someone had been down previously and put up those fire escape signs, because otherwise you could have spent a week in here without finding your way out. When we first saw it, and when it was built, this is what was on the floor, and this is what more or less is underneath your feet right now. So the purpose of the basement, the vaults that we're sitting in here, was actually to store whiskey barrels. So the whiskey barrels were lowered through an opening out at ground level by a derrick crane, and they were lowered down, and then they were rolled in on the flat flagstones that you see from left to right through the door that you just came in there. And then they had a kind of a passage up the middle that was also nice and smooth and flat. And to the side of that, they're just beach cobbles. They're just rounded beach cobbles rather than having soil there. And then they had these limestone rails. And those whiskey barrel rails were there just to support the barrels on and stop them rolling around. So that's what was there when we came in here. So we were very cognizant of trying to leave as much of that as possible. But we knew we didn't want to dig down any lower because we damaged so much of this. But we also didn't want to put everything on top because it would have been too low. So we came to a compromise, which was we took out all the barrel rails but left everything else. So all the flags, all the cobbles are under our feet as we speak right now. So if Mervyn ever wants to see them again, he can. They're all still there. How we dealt with it from a damp proofing problem, just for the architects here, we covered it with effectively a plastic sheet, which kept the damp down, and then covered it with concrete. So if we ever do need to take it up as well, the plastic protected from that. And the rest of the damp proofing, to prevent damp rising in this building, works on based on an electric system. So there's a hidden titanium wire just below the carpet level in each of these vaults that effectively is plugged in and creates this negative charge that keeps the damp down below that. So when people are on their way out, just don't unplug it. 7 plugs over there for all the vaults. So this is what we saw in 2001 when we took it down, and you can see sections of brickwork stuck in up at the top near the roof level. There was lots of modifications made over the years to it. But the last time it was seen like that was, and this is a section from, and some people might have seen this before, this was an extract from the London Illustrated News in 1856, when after the Crimean War, 3,000 Irish soldiers were returning to Ireland, and the Lord Mayor of Dublin decided to have a banquet for them, and they didn't have a room big enough in Ireland for that. So they decided to clear out the ground floor of tobacco, and they decided to set up tables. And there's a big long article all about who gave what and how many hogs' heads they ate and all this kind of stuff here. And it's quite informative. But this was a record of what the building was like in 1856 as well, with no cross walls in it. And I'll come back to this at a later stage as well. So here we have the original sketch again from 1818 that George Rennie produced. What you see with that is that you still see some of the trusses there. Then there's some modifications to it, and this was one of the cross walls that was in the building at the time, and you can see the stairs leading up to the mezzanine, so they put mezzanines in there as well, again for fire breaks. And then when we took down those cross walls, that's the view that you saw. So when we got in here as well, then we were able to inspect it. So here we are up I was up on the scaffolding in 2001, looking at the condition of this cast iron work and wrought iron work, and seeing what the condition of it was like. So here you are, and you can see all these layers of paint all over it, that had been painted maybe 10 times in places and 20 times in other places and that. So we did have to get the paint analysed, because in those days the lead was a great additive that they added to paint for spreading it, and if we were going to refurbish the building for generations to come, we had to get rid of that. We couldn't just encapsulate it. So there was a huge amount of work and time spent on getting rid of that. What I'm going to show you here actually is, this just looks a bit innocuous the way it is, but this is the rainwater pipe put in the building. And where that is located is that if you look carefully on your way out, these two columns, while they might appear to be the same size, one is 8 inches and the other is 12 inches in diameter. And the one on the right hand side being bigger actually contains the rainwater pipe. But it doesn't contain a pipe, it's just the column is hollow. And so they cast the column with the rainwater pipe in it like that, so that all they had to do was put a spigot at the top and an outlet at the bottom, and the column itself is the rainwater pipe. So when you're up there, when you're leaving here, you'll see every third pipe along the way contains a rainwater pipe, and then it went into a horizontal pipe that came out through the building as well. So this was some of the conditions that we see on it up there. So you can see some very badly corroded, that just had slates on the top, but you can see it's quite amazing for 1820, where they had the cast iron slating battens here are what we call them fish belly. They're bigger at the point where there's more stresses, so they really understood what they were doing in 1818. And then you can see other areas where it's not as badly corroded, but you can see the quality. These are castings made 200 years ago, when they just after inventing this whole process, and you can see the quality of how crisp and how sharp it is. And this is without actually us refurbishing it. But in some places there's more corrosion than in other places. And this is what it would have looked like from underneath on the day it opened, really. Okay, the plastic is we're cleaning paint off next door, but you just see slates underneath it. So one of the big things with this building was that John Rennie promised the Dublin Port Docks in 1815, when he was first commissioned for this. He said, I will build you a building that has no wood in it at all, because warehouses like this were quite regularly going up in smoke. They were quite regularly burning down. So the big concern was that how can we build a building that doesn't have any wood in it? So John Rennie promised that he'd build a building without any wood in it, which he did. And then they went and put whiskey and tobacco in it, So in 1995, 96, there was a lot of sampling done on what the building should look like, and an awful lot of time was spent on colours and schemes and how to deal with it. So what you see here is the sample from 1995. So you see the white panel up above. So we felt we couldn't leave it with just the slates on the top of it completely. So what had to happen is it had to have some form of insulation there to keep it slightly warm. Not a huge amount of heat, but something at all. So what you have is you have a 40 millimeters of a metal panel, 40 millimeters of insulation there. And then the idea was we put the slates on top of it. So a lot of these samples were done just for colour schemes, just to see what it's like. And you can see in the background, that was the condition afterwards. So here's the sample panel again, and you can see the way the column turns into a square capital up above, and then you've got these cast iron beams up above. So at roof level outside, so you can see the original slates being reused here on top of the insulated panels. So the insulated panels actually keep out the rain, but the original slates were reused as much as possible. So from the outside, when you're walking around, you will see original slates, but when we did run out of them, in the internal valleys where you can't see them, there is a replacement slate put on it. It's not the original 200-year-old slate, but on the outside it is. All the lead work was redone, huge amount of work was put into that. All the pointing, which is all the joints between the brickwork, was redone, and that literally took 4 guys 2 years to do. They were just forever here doing it. One of the major things when we were doing the building was that the building had to operate and be functional, but yet still protect the heritage, and that's one of the biggest challenges about it. And one of the biggest challenges with this building was, well, what's it going to be used for? And the ideal scenario that the Dublin Docklands Development Authority came up with was that wouldn't it be great if it was used as a kind of a retail centre, like a shopping centre, and that the basement here was used for nightclubs or bars. Wouldn't that be great? But they all have their problems. You know, when you go into a shop, it needs power, light, electricity, toilets. The basements, particularly for nightclubs, it needs air, it needs light, heat. How do you manage to do all of those things without destroying the place, without digging it up? We already knew we didn't want to dig up the cobbles and the flags at basement level. So we decided we had enough depth up at ground floor level. So we decided, let's try and put all the services in up there and let's treat it like a shopping centre. It sounds crude, but that was the thinking behind it. So what you're actually seeing here is you're seeing these pipes that we're about to put in the ground above our heads here. And what you can see as well in places, you'll see above our heads, you'll see these original openings that are here in the vaults. They were originally put in, we call them cast iron lenses, and there was 4 in every vault. And we believe they were put in and they had some kind of either a grating over the top or some form of glass, which would have been quite adventurous for them in here. But they needed to get some light in here, because wandering around a vault full of whiskey barrels with a naked flame wouldn't have been a really good idea. So they decided to try and get some light in here. So these cast iron lenses were in perfect condition. So we said, why don't we try and reuse them in a way? So this was the scheme that was come up with the M&E engineers, and at the time I was working for Arab Consulting Engineers, and the mechanical and electrical services were being done by them as well. So we had this integrated team working on it. So what the idea was, was that we would bury ducts in the ground floor up above, and nobody would see them, so people would walk on them, but they'd be connected to down below here. So what you actually see here is that the idea is that from east to west along this way, all the vaults are connected by trenches that are above our heads. So this vault is connected to one of the next one, and the air is connected all the way back to the side of the building. So that there's an air handling unit over there that's pumping fresh and cool air into the building and down into us here. And while it pumps it in down here, the one at the very far end takes it out and brings it back to the air handling unit, all again underneath the floor, all again without being seen, and using the original openings that were there in 18, that were put in 1818. And then to get light and power into it, there was one of them that was used to put the pipes into it. So if you look up into some of them, here you can actually see the pipes passing through it now. Most of them are blocked up for visual reasons now, but that's the way it was. So here's us putting the openings in, putting the ducts in. So they're a concrete duct with a metal over the top, and then we pour concrete over. So this is actually the top of the lens. So if you stick your head up through that, that's what you will see up there. And this is it, practically the whole building being done. This is the photograph being done. And then this is actually a photograph of right over our heads, just at the stairs where you came down. We had to go a little bit sideways around various things because of height. So, but this is all buried below the feet up there, and nobody sees it. East elevation, we needed to service the building, so it was decided that that was the building that we would try and put the air handling units and various things like that on it. So we went about digging out over there and putting a basement in on that side. So this is us digging out over there, going down. And the way they built buildings like this, particularly when they backfilled all the ground against it, they didn't have any products to keep damp out. So how they did is they had this kind of flying arch, as we call it, this springing arch. So there was this gap between the building and the earth there to stop the damp coming in. So you could actually walk along here, well not walk, you had to crouch to go along here, and we could see some of the original brickwork that had not had rain touching it for 200 years. And that's what dictated what the outside of the building looks like now, because we knew what it looked like 200 years ago. It was completely fresh pointing that was there. So here's us continuing on digging it, and then you can see openings on the right hand side, which is how the air gets out through the building from those ducts. And this was the condition we found it in. You can see this was bricked up before, so we took this down, took back the metal to it absolutely clean, and then repainted it as well. And that's probably the same door that I just showed in the photograph. So what you have on the far side of the east elevation now, what you're looking at here, are these chimneys that we built up the side of the building to bring the air up the side of the building so it wouldn't be seen. So the air that we're getting from here is going to those chimneys, and fresh air is coming in from the dock side, but that's quite a complicated story, so I won't go into it today. So this is part of the works that we did. So we covered the whole building. In order to shot blast, as we call it, which was to take the paint with the lead in it off, we couldn't have this floating around in the air outside or going into the living. So what we had to do is to cover the whole building with this massive tent, which we did. And people could only operate in here with full breathing apparatus. So it took us, we couldn't go in for an hour after they stopped doing that, even though we had our own kind of dust masks and stuff like that on. So the whole thing was covered with a complete tent. and the metal was completely, the paint was completely blasted off it, so right back to bare metal. So we took all these layers of paint off it. With the lanterns that were originally up on the roof, we couldn't actually salvage them. They were in such bad condition. A lot of it was to do with very poor detailing. So they couldn't actually be salvaged, so it was decided to remake those. So there's some of the original slates that were reused, stamped and stored and reused on the site. So these are photographs from year 2000. You can see the condition of it, all with the original painted glass. So the lanterns that are on the building here are completely new. They're 20 years old, but they're in cast iron as well. So they're completely made. They were made from, they tried to source the original company who cast the iron for this building, but they had already closed. They closed 100 years ago, I suppose. So these are brand new, better detailing, but we brought them here to Ireland as bare metal, and they're painted here in upstairs so that they would match exactly what it is. So just after they're painted here, then a whole team of guys had to put glass into all of these. So I think they took about 2 years to put glass in as well. So we had a factory system set up. So a lot of the time it was easier to take the metal apart. So it was like a jigsaw. Everything went together with wedges and grooves and things like that. So it all went together that way. And here's some of the metal blasted back, and you can see these kind of dark brown patches are what we call mill scale. That's exactly as it came out of the mill in 1818, really. You know, it came out really, really like that. So we effectively, you can see how sharp all of these irises are. It's just fantastic considering it's 200 years ago. So this is it, a sample being just finished, and you can see the rainwater pipe just peeking out at the top here. So what you have is you have this square capital on top of the round column, and the way the system worked here is you had these curved cast iron beams, which are very standard old technology, and they slotted into the capital there. And then you had the trusses that were originally buried in those cast iron beams. So here's the kit of parts. So here's the parts that we had taken, all these slating bands that supported the slate, and they're all painted here like a factory system up on the ground floor up above here. And then we had to start putting it back together again. So this is the kind of the detailing that it was, that they made thousands of these, but they all had to fit and match, and they were all kind of gently hammered back into place and wedged into place, and that's how it was held in place. And you can see the quality of the connections here, that everything is just perfectly made and everything just fits together. So we were able to take it apart, paint it. If we left it up there, we would have had bits of grit and bits of lead paint stuck in the gaps, so we tried to take as much of it apart as possible. This is it going back on, so you can see some mistake balance missing. So this is just a nice photograph of the very interesting details of how to put it together. You can see we could take apart these trusses quite easily, because the way they worked is it's all about overlapping pieces and wedges holding it together, and that's really simple type of construction, but it's very, very effective. And this is the level of technology that we're dealing with in 1818. And bearing in mind, this was one of the first buildings built in both Ireland and the UK using this technology as well. But I'll be telling you about that in a minute as well. So here we are putting it back together again. So you have the rafters and the purlins, but the slating bands are missing. Now we're starting to put the slating bands back on it. As we're going through it here, you can see the parts are being built up again. You can see the gutter, the big cast iron gutter up above. This is the top of the cast iron gutter. We're still in the tent here when we're just painting it after that. And this is it with the panels going on then, and you can see the lanterns going in, the lanterns to complete the whole entity. And this is it, this is the sample panel, very similar to what we were talking about. This is at the north end of the building, right over our heads here, really complicated, the hip end where it becomes very, very complicated. And I think this is, we'd have trouble building this now, 200 years later. So to build that 200 years ago is phenomenal. Here we go, a better view of the connections. You can see all the pins and the wedges. You can imagine teams of guys up there on scaffolding, just putting it all together, bit left, bit right, put the pin in, hammer away. And to go back to, this is a photograph we took in 2001 and the 1880 sketch, and you can see the similarity. There's a bit changed since then, but the ideas are still the same. You can see the bolts, you can see the wedges, you can see the idea that they were going through. And the slates. So one of the issues with the slates was, we thought long and hard about it, but we ended up putting some wood back in the building. So after 200 years, we put wood back in the building. So we had to put, you can see the timber battens just going on top to hold the slates, which is a traditional form of construction, but believe me, the architect and ourselves thought long and hard about was there an alternative, but no, timber was the only option. So back in 2001 we put insertions into the building, but thinking about it from a conservation point of view as well. So in red, so this is the cross section to the building, but the client wanted to put shops up there. So he said, let's put shops up there. And he said, well, we want storage on top as well for the shops, or we might have another use in the future. But we were very cognizant of the fact that, you know, we had this historic structure and we didn't want to damage it. We wanted it in such a way that any works we did could be reversible in the future if someone decided in the future they didn't want that mezzanine there. So we came up with this idea that we would actually make an independent structure. So the mezzanines there that you see as you walk through the roofs of the shops don't touch the original structure. That had two benefits. One, we didn't have to really interrogate how good the construction was, the original structure. It had been there for 200 years, but also meant we didn't have to fire protect the original structure, which was really good, so we could leave it alone from it. So effectively we built an independent structure right beside the structure. So this is it during construction, so you can see that it's independently supported. The reason the beam is quite big is that it's providing stability so it won't fall over. But it's completely independent, doesn't touch the original building at all. We can come in, take it out, we can do whatever we want to it, but it won't affect the original structure. And it just comprised of steel and timber, so it was brought in using some quite big machines, but it can be brought out quite easily as well by manhandle. So if Mervyn ever decides to change things, he can. It's quite easy to change. This was it just when the mezzanine was finished, when you can see again from one end 150 metres to the other end. It's completely different to that now. I think there's 100 people work up there at the dog patch, with gardens and footballs and table tennis tables and things like that, touching the wrought iron roof on it. So that's what it did look like in 2000. This was the corridor at the back, and using the principles of conservation as well, we had minimal connection again. The corridor at the back had to be a fire corridor, and so it had to be constructed in concrete. But we really wanted to have the minimum impact on the building. So we built a block wall and we put a concrete lid on it. And the detail on the right hand side just shows the connection. The concrete only connects in with a continuous steel angle, and that's just bolted in occasionally. And if Mervyn also says he wants to take that out, the only thing that connects with the building is actually those angles. Everything else can be taken out. And then when we put all the services into those corridors, you would see that nothing touches the original building. All you see is all the surfaces hang off the new slab, again, so we didn't damage the old slabs. We tried to have just minimal intervention. And back during the epic fit out, when Mervyn said he wanted a bigger shop there and he took out the corridor at the back, we were able to modify that by not putting in any structure. So we had our column, we were able to take out the wall, hold it up, again without touching the original structure. So this is all things that we just tried to do to preserve the integrity of the original structure. So now talking about one of the major features of the building, the south elevation. When we first saw it, this is what the elevation looked like, and it's been like this for years. And the two big openings in the building were used to drive 40-foot trucks into the building. But because, as you know, when you walk in that door, it's about a metre of a difference. You walk up 4 or 5 steps to get into the building. This is what the architect wanted to achieve. The architect said, one day Michael came in and he said, I want to cut the end off this building. I want the public to see this building. I want everybody to know how nice this building is inside. So he said, this is my idea, just big sheets of glass on the south elevation. And the client said to him, well, how are we going to do that? He said, I have no idea. But there is a man, an Irish architect, living and working in Paris called Tom Gray, who is supposed to be a really, really good facade engineer. And Tom Gray worked for a practice called RF4, which was set up by an Irishman called Peter Rice in Paris in the late 70s, and they worked on things like the Pompidou Centre, and he had previously worked with Arab on the Sydney Opera House. So Tom was asked to come to Ireland, so Tom came to Ireland and was presented with the same task. So we said, yeah, let's cut the end off the building. So this is us cutting the end off the building. And we're still cutting it. So, but we didn't really know what we were going to do. So I'm going to explain to you how it's going to work. So Tom came to me and he said, right, we're going to cut the end off the building and we want to actually create a situation where we just want glass, the minimal amount of glass on the end of the building. So I said, well, how are we going to do that? And he said, well, I have this idea how to do it. He said, I want it to be single glazing. I want it to be really, really clear glass. And therefore I want the glass to come from America because it's the only place to make this low iron glass. We said, fine. And he said, right, and I have this idea that we're going to use it, and we didn't use this kind of language, we're changing it for the audience here. He said, I want this, the way it's going to work is going to be these big elastic bands, 50 metres long, that we stretch really, really tight across the building, across the front of it. And then I'll hang my glass off those elastic bands. And then when the wind blows, it won't be able to move. And I said, that sounds great, but how are we going to make that work? And he said, he said to me, I said, well, can we just do, so the lines, the diagonal lines across the middle there are the elastic bands, and the thick lines on either side are what are supporting the elastic bands. So he's saying, so I said to Tom, well, we'll start at ground floor level, and Tom said, no, that's not good enough. No, I need to go all the way down to the basement. I need to make it bigger. So he said, I want 5 or 6 elastic bands here so my glass can fit on it. And I said, well, the problem with that is we need a huge, there's huge forces in that. How am I going to stop it falling in? And I said to him, well, can I put something in the middle? Can I put a lollipop stick in the middle to hold apart these elastic bands like this? And Tom said, no, you can't, because then we'll have this big heavy beam in the middle of it where I want my glass. So we came to a compromise and we said, okay, well, we'll try and split it. We'll try and split it so that we won't have it going right down the middle of it. So we said, let's put one on the inside of the glass and one on the outside of the glass, and we'll try and get it to work. And I said, okay, we'll get something to work that way. And then instead of having big lumps of foundations, we'll actually have another kind of elastic band working the other way at the bottom, hold the whole thing together. So that was the principle behind it. And that sounds easy, but then we were dealing with huge things. So the big elements at the side became these massive column sections here you see at the side, massive things, bigger than a person. And these are the elastic bands. Now I didn't show them curved, but these are the elastic bands that go from side to side, which are tightened to a huge level so that they won't move when the wind blows. And this is it looking down on it. So what's happened is Tom decided that rather than the elastic bands going completely straight across, what he would do is he would have them coming out a little bit in a kind of a curve, which would make it look nicer, and have these kind of vertical trusses matching where the columns are in the building, holding the elastic bands apart. And then he could put his single glaze in between it. So then I had the task of putting the prop, the lollipop stick on the outside, which is just there, so you don't actually see it out there, but that acts as a big concrete beam. And then one on the inside, which is underneath the glass balustrade, so there's another one there as well. So we've gone inside and outside, and the glass goes up the middle. So there's a lot of engineering going on there to hold it all up, and you don't see it, so that's what I'm telling you about it today. And this is us building it, so you can see men in the hole, lots of reinforcement, lots of concrete, original walls that were underneath where they had cut back the walls. So these walls that you see on the left hand side were built in around 1880 when they cut back the building first of all. And this is it finished, and the tie across the bottom, you don't see it here now, but it consists of, you'll see a grill along the bottom, which air can be blown up through the facade, and there's a big duct underneath that acts as this big tie as well underneath it, but it's all completely concealed and hidden. This is when we started cutting it back. I always found this fascinating when we cut it with a saw, but you're actually going through builders' debris. You know, builders were messy back in 1880 as well, so you can see lumps of stone they just threw in at the top here, you know, before they finished, you know. They just threw it into the hole, and it's been there for 200 years like that. But I mentioned also that the trucks had driven in the door, in 2 doors of it. So when we arrived in, what we found these beautiful vaults like you see here, and 2 of them were smashed with these flat concrete slabs going through them here. So you can see it here that this is a big flat concrete slab just going through the arch, and this was put in the 70s, and we needed to reinstate that. So we spent a lot of time thinking about it and thinking about how they originally built it. And we used their same techniques, which was effectively what you do is you put up a timber frame and then you start building the bricks on top of it. And that's what we did. And this is one of the new arches. It's kind of hard to see now, but this was one of the new arches that we built. And then at the same time we had to make the finished cut that we did look as nice as we could. So the bricks that are used here are not quite a match, but they were the bricks that came from the cross walls that we knocked down when we took over the building. So we know they've been in the building 140 years already, so we reused those for it. And that's what you see in the front. So this is in the middle of building it, so this is the architect on the left, Pat Kerwin from Michael Collins Architects, having a look at this. And this is one of my lollipop sticks here going across. And this was one of the first samples that was done. And this was it finished just before we connected up the facade on it. So you can see it's faced with the stone again, and that stone is not new stone, it was stone that was salvaged or anything that we demolished here. But there's some parts of the building like this. This is just behind the epic entrance here. This is what you see here. This was peppered with holes, really bad, like that. So after much debate and much consideration, it was felt we couldn't do anything about that. So that's what you see outside. So that's why it's plastered. So it's pretty poor. But we did a lot of work inside. So if you go down into Epic, you go down a staircase. So there's a lot of work involved with doing this. So this was it in year 2002. This was it today. So nice stairs, nicely finished off. And here, this was a frame that we had to put at the top of the glass, or above all the glass, to hold it all in place. So it's supported on some steelwork that's quite concealed within the facade as well there, which is very, very delicate. And this is it, just before we opened. And there are the elastic bands and the very clear glass that came all the way from America. But a couple of little stories to go with it, right? One of the stories is that I think you all know about the Sean Casey Bridge. When you walk across the Sean Casey Bridge, wouldn't it be great if you just walked straight across into the CHQ building? Which you can't. So you end up coming across and you meet the lights and you turn left and you go up in the next bay. But what you actually will notice is that the Sean Casey Bridge does line up with the second bay on the right hand side. But the reason it lines up with that is that we were refurbishing the building at the same time the competition was let for the Sean Casey Bridge. And it was decided that it would line up with the mall of the building upstairs with this building, rather than just pick a random location. So that was decided to do that. But this was the final drawing that was issued. And this drawing came about by, when this drawing in its original format, the shops were 2 bays deep at the bottom of the drawing here, and 1 bay deep on the top of the drawing. So you had your shops there, and the mall was up there, 1 higher. Until one day I remember being on a meeting and the project manager from the DPA came in and said, I have an idea, I think we should put the double shops on the top and on the east and the single on the bottom. And everyone said, yeah, grand, that's a great idea. But nobody told the people building the bridge. So the bridge lines up with that one. All because of that mistake, and nobody's moving anything. So. And now, another one that not a lot of people know about is not all is what it seems in this building though. This is another record drawing from the West India Docks, also by the same engineer, John Rennie, in 1817, 1818. And this drawing was done probably a little bit later than that, but they call it that. And what you can see here is you can see quite a lot of similarities to the building we're in. And the similarities are that it has a basement vault, it has those lenses, those holes through it that the light can get down. The vaults are different, they're what we call, you can see they're columns, and they form this complicated shape. We call them groin vaults, but barrel vaults like this are much better for storing whiskey in rather than those ones. But up above it, what you see is you'll see the cast iron columns, and you'll see the cast iron beams that you see upstairs here. So it's on the left hand side here. See these curved beams, which are old technology. It's kind of, for 1818, they built lots of bridges using those. But what you actually see there is you see a timber truss. You don't see the cast iron truss. And it was the same engineer at the time. And if you think back to what this is, this was the original 1818 sketch. And this is what we call a queen post truss. And it's very similar in style to this, except the timber one's much chunkier. You can see the lanterns, you can see the whole shape of the whole thing looks exactly the same. And why wouldn't it be? It's been done within 2 or 3 years of each other. But one day I was up when we were making this, when we were refurbishing the building in 2001. I was up on the scaffolding just after we were finished painting, and I was inspecting the paint. And I noticed there was a large crack in one of these cast iron beams. And you can see the crack just here. And I thought that crack was really unusual, and I got a little bit worried about it. So I decided to get a hammer and start to go around looking for more cracks. And while I couldn't see the cracks, as I was banging the cast iron, I could hear that there were different sounds around the place. So I got pretty worried, and I did quite an extensive survey, and I discovered they were nearly all cracked. And it got me a little bit worried about the whole thing. So it then kind of, the penny dropped with me that there was a reason, maybe, why there was something wrong. There was always something wrong with this building. Like I've been going on about how carefully detailed all the high-level trusses were. They were beautifully crafted. Everything was curved. Everything had its place. It was extremely well thought out, which is the case except for one thing in this building. And the one thing is you see these diagonal struts, props. These ones here. And while they're beautifully detailed at the top, they're really crudely detailed at the bottom where they meet the top of the column. And you also see here, they don't exist here. So if you look at this detail here, it's this really awkward bird's mouth detail, but they don't appear in the London drawing. So then I started to do a little bit more research on it. And this is what it looked like before. This is where you had slate roof on the top and it was all working fine, or so we thought. But if you've ever been in a building like this, or even I remember it at the start, there's no insulation, so the sun shines on the top of this, and what happens is it really, really heats up. And this building was held together by wedges, and the whole kind of principle and philosophy behind it is that these cast iron trusses, these cast iron beams were wedged in behind this capital section, this square section, were wedged in there. And when they heated up, the idea was that they'd expand a little bit. But I don't think they expanded, and they got wedged in, and they got stuck in there. And then in the heat and the cold, they started to crack. And very soon after they built the building, they started to crack. And everyone got really worried. And the reason they got really worried is it turned out, doing some research on this building, it turned out originally this building was to be constructed using cast iron and wrought iron like we have upstairs. And in fact, they did build it like that first. So they put in the cast iron columns, they put in the cast iron beams, and then they started building the trusses. And they finished the first section of the building, and it lasted 1 month and it collapsed. And then the client said, oh my God, we don't want any of your newfangled ideas, you know, and the records actually say enough of the business, we want to get on with it. So they built that in timber. And this was at the same time that he was here building this in Ireland. So he came to Ireland, things started to crack. At this stage, unfortunately, John Rennie himself had died, because he died in 1821. So we think his son, and you can see this because this shows how beautifully detailed it was. But then you have this whole ugly kind of afterthought drawing at the bottom, or connection at the bottom. So we think his son came back within the first 10 years of the building being built and put in these struts to hold it up. So that, in fact, the cast iron beams don't do any work anymore, because they got so worried that the whole building was going to collapse as well. So the good news from Irvine is they've been up there for 200 years, and it's not going anywhere. But the interesting thing is that you look back to the Crimean War banquet illustration in 1856, and they're there. So we know they were there for over 150 years, so I'm pretty sure it went in quite early. And you can see them here to this day. And last kind of section on this, the Western Conservatory. When we put in the Western Conservatory, I remember it was a London-based architect was brought over, called Fitzroy Robinson. They were brought over to kind of, how do we make the basement work? And they came up with this idea. They said, let's build an extension. And the rest of us at the meeting couldn't believe it. We said, geez, the building's not huge. We don't even know what to do with it. We said, no, let's build a big glass box on the western side. And the idea was to get people down into this level, into this basement. And it's turned out to be quite successful. It's how you get in here. So we came up with the idea of a big long glass box, but nobody knew how to do it elegantly. So Tom Gray in Paris was called on again to come up with an idea. And Tom said, I'm going to take my inspiration from the building. But I hadn't come up with my theory of this defect in the building about the fact that there was a problem with it. So Tom came up with the idea, and he decided to borrow on what he saw inside. He decided to borrow on these struts. So we came up with the idea of these V's inside to support the structure. So you can see the V's. So our western elevation, so these are some sketches I remember that I did at the time trying to understand what he was doing. So you can see he built the V's, and there they are for all to see, and he concealed the rainwater pipes, not within it but behind it, very much using the same ideas that John Rennie used in 1818. However, the only thing he wasn't aware of is that this is based on the remedial works that were done around 1830. So we have quite a lot of layers of history to go with this, to do with it. So, and this is what it looked like just when we finished, and this is what it looked like, I think, practically the day it was handed over in year 2001, and that's the end of my presentation.